Hey there, this is Will Marshall at Pyramind in San Francisco. Today I'm going to be showing you a specific sort of live sounding drum setup that I've programmed using Native Instruments Studio Drummer. And what I was trying to do when I made this was emulate as closely as I could the kind of very tight R&B or hip hop drum sound that's associated with acts like The Roots, some of Kendrick Lamar's newest material, or bands like Haitus Kaiyote out of Melbourne. So very kind of dry and tight sound that is typically used with kind of asymmetric or off-kilter beats, a lot of swing, and often used in a kind of electronic and live music hybrid context. So the way I programmed this was kind of unscientific. I read a couple of interviews with Questlove, who's kind of the most famous drummer who uses this style, and I just played around with Studio Drummer, and I wanted to show you the results I had got and walk you through how I got there. So firstly, this is the kind of basic sound. And then a different drum loop. Now, obviously, this is all completely unmixed and unmastered. This is just a kind of sketching drum kit that I've been using to flesh out my own rhythms. So, to start with, one really big thing I did to make this easier for myself was I set up Kontakt to have labeled drum cells. Now, if you go into the MIDI roll here, you can see each MIDI note has a name associated with it. The way I did that was a little bit time consuming, but worth doing. And once you do it once, you can just save that drum kit and use it forever. You want to bust open a drum kit in Ableton, load up Kontakt, like so. I'm gonna just grab just the default, where is it? Studio Drummer pack, and I'll use the Garage kit, I guess. Load. This takes a moment. Okay, and once we've got the drum kit loaded up, we're gonna go back to Ableton's drum racks. You see, if we open up the chain selector and open up the I/O tab, by default, this Kontakt has been set on C1, cell C1, which responds to the MIDI note C1. We can actually go to this drop down here, this receive drop down, and set it to all notes. And see how it vanishes out of the drum rack here, because it's no longer responding to any specific cell. What it means is any MIDI note that you play into the drum rack will go straight through to Kontakt, so you can just play the whole Kontakt drum library without having to create lots of cells for it. Like so. So then, the only thing you have to do to get the naming in is manually create chains for each drum sound in Kontakt. Now this is, like so, there we go, that's our C1, and C1 is going to be a kick, obviously. You just have to go through Kontakt and name each one. The first one, C1 kick, is really easy, but let's show you how to figure out the name and get it right for, let's say, C#1. So we create that extra chain, we move it to C#1, and then we're going to open up Kontakt, go into our options here, and if you hit select by MIDI, it will actually show you the sample that's being played every time you play a MIDI note. So if we play C#1, you'll see we get the snare side stick. So we can label this snare side stick. To do the next one, I'll just duplicate this, move the note up by 1, and now if I play that note, there we go. We have a snare center, is probably what I would call that. And then to do one more, we'll duplicate, move it up by 1 again, play that note, and that is a room shot. So we'll say room shot there. So obviously you have to go through the entire set of drum samples to get a fully labeled drum rack, and it is a little tedious, but I promise you it's totally worth doing. So you can see here, I've gone through and I've labeled all of the different drum samples in my Kontakt patch, which makes this much easier for writing. So the process I went through to get the sound I'm looking for was I just kind of felt my way through it. It wasn't particularly scientific. I started off with the jazz mixer preset. I'm not going to load it again because it will load that preset. But basically I went through all of them, and the jazz preset was the closest to the sound I was looking for. And then what I did was, if you look at the mixer here, I kind of adjusted each of the core sounds. Really, I'm only using the kicks, the snares, and the hi-hats. I'm not using much in the way of the toms in this kind of style of drumming, so I didn't play with them. I haven't got the sound of the toms particularly dialed in. And what I did was fairly straightforward. If we go back to the kit, you can see if you click on each of these kind of core drum sounds, you have here two mix controls, and they are the overhead mix and the room mix. Now the overhead mics are literally the mics overhead on a drum kit, and they tend to give you a lot of kind of brightness and splashiness and vibrancy in your drum sounds. If applied to a kick, let's just you get a lot of kind of high-end echoing, basically reverberation from the room the drums were recorded in. So what I did was I dialed down the overhead mix on that kick to try and make the kick sound kind of deeper and less present in the high end. Put a little bit in there because, you know, turning it all the way down doesn't sound great. And then the next over here is the room mix. And the room mix basically represents a microphone that's kind of sitting off to the side and it was recording the sound of the room the being drums are recorded in. So it's essentially capturing the room reverb. And you can hear there's kind of a long reverb tail. Again, I dialed that down from the default because I don't want a long reverb tail on my kick drum. I want my kick drum to be quite tight. The next thing I did was dial down the tuning. Basically, the default settings in Studio Drummer have the kick and the snare tuned more closely together. But this kind of hip-hop or R&B drum sound tends to have a deep kick and a high-pitched, very tightly wound snare. And so I tuned down the kick. I just use my ears. I just tuned it down. I think that's 2 whole semitones. This thing doesn't actually give me a readout, but it sounds like it. And that was kind of all the modifications I made to the kick. I then went through to the snare, and I kind of did the opposite. I actually brought down the overhead mix just a little and the room mix just a little. See how bringing down the overhead mix kind of tightens up the snare sound? It takes some of the reverb away from it. And I did the same, just a nudge with the room mix. And the last, and I think the most important thing I did, was I tuned the snare up. Because by default, it was this. And that does not have like a hip hop crack to it. That sounds more like a rock and roll snare or kind of more traditional. So I kind of tuned it up and down, and again, just using my ears until that sounds very different from if I put the tuning back versus it gives you just a kind of tighter sound. And that high-pitched snare, when you tune a snare and you turn the tuning key and you kind of put it under a lot of pressure, and that actually changes the way the snare sounds, which is something I really enjoy. So that were kind of the basic and the most obvious quick shifts I made to the kit. The last thing I did was go into this mixer mode here. I turned down, this is the bus for the stereo overheads, and this is the bus for the mono overheads. If we solo those, you can hear you've still got a lot of sound in there. They were more up here, and I turned them down. I turned this one down as well, just because I felt like reducing some of the kind of ambient microphones to tighten the kit up and made it sound more dry and more hip-hoppy. Also, the overheads are typically where the, if I find a hi-hat, where is a hi-hat note gonna be? Yeah, that's a hi-hat there. So you can hear a lot of the tone of the hi-hats comes from the overhead mics, like if you solo the hi-hat channel itself. If we mute these, you can see that a lot of the brightness and the tone of the hi-hats is coming from those overheads. So in bringing down the overheads quite a bit, I made the hi-hats basically just gentler. There was kind of a harsh edge to them I didn't like, and it brought them down in the mix, made them a little quieter. And I've dialed in, if we go to our buses here, you've got a reverb bus, and I picked kind of a jazz club, like a longer reverb. You can see I've got kind of a fairly long reverb. And I changed that from the default room, which was a shorter reverb, so it's kind of a longer, more spacious reverb. But as you can see, I've turned the volume quite a way down, and the kick isn't going to the reverb at all, the snare is a bit, and then the hi-hats are quite a lot. So I kind of tried to get a sense of basically a generally dry kit with not that much in the way of overhead or room miking, but then I put the whole kit through kind of a long jazz club reverb, which gave it kind of a sense of a tight kit but being heard from further away. And that really gave me the sound I was looking for. So there was one kind of last change I made to the snare specifically using the transient designer in the snare. Now, a transient designer, this is the Native Instruments transient designer, transient master, which is really, really very good. If I turn this off, you get kind of a raw snare sound. And if I turn it back on, you get a tighter one. What I've done is I've dialed up the attack, even push that harder if I wanted to, and dialed down the sustain, which has taken a lot of the kind of the rattle and the chains on the underside of the snare. It's reduced that a lot. So instead of having this kind of long sound, we've brought it down to kind of a whip cracking noise, which lets it cut through the mix more and gives it that kind of precision that's really important in the wonkiness of these beats. So those are kind of the core of all the changes I made. I haven't done any EQ work on any of these drum samples, personally just because I don't like the EQs built into Studio Drummer, so they're just the default EQ settings. What I will do when I mix this is I'll actually make duplicate copies of Kontakt for all the hi-hats, all the snares, all the kicks, and then I'll mix each one of those buses individually. So that will allow me to really dial in the EQ and stuff later down the line when I have more of a sense of exactly how these drums need to sound for the song I'm working on. And so that is kind of the core of it in terms of dialing in Kontakt to get the sound I want. And if I duplicate this, I'm going to reset it to the default kit so you can see basically the difference in sound. So if we load up Kontakt here, I've just made a duplicate kit, go to Browse, and we go to the Studio Drummer and bring in the Garage kit. I picked the Garage kit. Literally, I just tried all of the kits that were available. I have the Abbey Road ones as well, and I just liked the Garage kit best. So this is our drum loop with the default settings. And our drum loop with the modified settings to make it tighter. You can see it's like a radically different sound with not that many modifications. So in terms of kind of quick final things I did to this, I threw on, this auto filter isn't doing anything, that was just an experiment I was playing with, but I threw on an EQA and just used that to roll off the low end of the kick. If you listen to that, rolling off that low end rumble on the kick really tightened up the sound again and gave me that kind of precision I was looking for. And then lastly, I used Yuhi Satin, just a tape emulation plugin, and I think it's just on one of the basic mastering presets. I spent almost no time on that. I just like the tone of tape on drum sounds a lot, and I tend to throw presets on. See how it brightens the whole thing up and kind of gels it all together. So that's it. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that could be done on mixing this, making it sound tighter, whatever you wanted to do. You could modify the snare samples more, but all of that is best left to a later point where you have actually written a whole song around the track and then you know whether the drums need to be softer or tighter or harder or whatever it is you need to do. For now, all I'm doing is saving this kit. It's actually labeled wrong right now. I call it, let's say, labeled R&B, what was it? It was the Garage kit. And then I'm going to go into my user library, go into my Coma Cartel, it's my project folder, drums, kits, got kits here, and if I drag this in here, can save it, and now I have this kit available to me whenever I want to get this kind of drum sound. So that's it. I hope that was useful to you. If you have any questions, comment on the video and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.